I got some unexpected findings on Shein, y'all. You're gonna want to hear this. So if you are new here, this is a 3-part series talking about Shein's effects on the world and everything. But this is part 2. Part 1 was about its effects on you, the consumer. So go watch that if you haven't already to have more context for this video and moving forward. This is part 2. We'll be talking about its effects on its garment workers and the people who actually make the clothes. Part 3 will be its effects on the environment and the planet. And lastly, I added a bonus. You know, there's 3 parts, but I decided maybe I'll do a bonus video reacting to the comments that actually inspired this whole series to begin with. Basically, I made this short, which I'll play in a second, and it just like got a lot of response. So I wanted to respond to the comments, give a little bit more context on where this was going, and just do a little bit of research myself to put out some information that y'all should know. So in this video, I was kind of showing the help tags from the clothes. I do want to address that in a bit, but here is the video to start off with. So Shein themselves actually responded to this, and they said, well, not my video, but responded to the alleged help tags in the clothes, and they said it was just a mistranslation, miscommunication with like the language barrier. A lot of people also interpreted them as help tags, and honestly at that time I think I was in such an era where I was like, this is so bad, like I hate this, anti, just like looking at it from such a dark lens. Since then, I realized there's just like a lot of gray area to situations, and looking back on it now, I think I can definitely see it being a mistranslation error, a language error. If you've ever been to any other countries that don't have English as their first language, it's very common that things are just lost in translation, and the tag itself does say need your help and the next line with washing. I can't say it's like definitely this, definitely that. So I think I definitely was coming at it from a very biased perspective. So for this video and all other videos moving forward about Shein or anything else, I really want to try to come at it on a non-biased perspective and just present you with the facts so you can come to your conclusion. I'll throw in my theories and thoughts here and there, but if anything, it does at least bring up the question of, well, who makes the clothes? How are they treated? What are their lives like? You know, and we'll be talking about that in this video. If you see me looking down, I have notes in front of me. So let's just like state what the accusations or the claims are that Shein even gets for their workers. So 1 is that the workers, the garment workers, are severely underpaid. 2, they have very inhumane labor practices like using child labor or just very extremely long hours, no vacation days. And 3, that they work in very hazardous conditions, just not safe, not up to standard. And from the research that I found, there were actually people who were on the ground who were able to visit these factories and interview the garment workers. So we got facts. So before looking at like kind of those claims, I do want to give a little bit context of how Shein operates, you know, in terms of its factories, manufacturing, and its workers. And I think most of y'all know Shein's a company that is based in China, and its factories are specifically in Guangzhou. Guangzhou's in the south, and this is a pretty popular place for manufacturing, so it's huge in that aspect. They have 300 to 400 main suppliers there, and they have approximately, like I mentioned, 1,000 subcontractors. If you don't know what subcontractors means in this sense, is that they have their main suppliers, right? So these are the people who are, you know, they make the clothes. They'll get orders from Shein to make the clothes, and then these main suppliers will maybe pass on that work to subcontractors. So that's what that means. This is definitely something that will come up later in this conversation, because the line gets really blurry of management and operations. What I found that was also really interesting about their manufacturing process is they don't have like a designated like, oh, you make this amount of clothes, you make this batch of clothes. These main suppliers, even though they're main suppliers, they have to bid for like making the clothes. So what Shein will do is they kind of decide on what they want to make, how much they want to make, and then they'll post that out there on into the world where like these manufacturers will see it. So think of like you selling a piece of clothes on like Poshmark or Depop, and then people can come and bid for it. Like they'll say, we'll produce it for this much, we'll produce it for this much, and then they kind of decide like who to go with from there. It's not like designated each time. It kind of already feels like it could be a race to the bottom in that sense. That's just what I'm thinking. I don't have any details to back that up. At any place where it's a bid, you know, people are gonna try to be competitive, and the first thing that they can do is with the price. Okay, so now that you understand a little bit more about how Shein operates with its manufacturers, let's talk about the wages. They're underpaid, and I thought this was the most interesting part, so you're going to want to hear this out. Keep in mind, all these numbers are from interviews with the actual workers, and also depends on factory to factory. So for some, they get paid per item, which is about 4 cents per item, y'all. 4 cents for one piece of clothing, y'all. And they make about 500 pieces per day, or sometimes they get a base pay of about $556 per month. For some factories, one person detailed that they withhold the first month's pay, and there is no overtime pay, and you only get 1 or 2 free days per month. But I do think it's also very important to give context on what these workers are like, a context on their lives. So very much often they're migrant workers, so they're coming from other cities, usually by themselves, not with family, not with kids, not with a partner. They're coming here for the sole purpose of getting that bag, and they're usually very skilled at doing this as well, because Shein just has such a high demand and fast turnaround that they need, that if you're new on the job, if you cannot just learn and pick up new designs like that, it's not gonna work out for you. You have to be very much skilled, trained, and this is like years, decades of experience here. And I just want you to keep that in mind, the nature of these workers, for what I'm about to tell you. One worker said that in a good month, they get paid about $1,400. In a bad month, they get paid $450. Again, this is depending on the number of items that they make. $1,400 sounds not much. But keep in mind, this is in China. The cost of living is just simply different. If we convert that into the Chinese currency, Chinese yuan, that is about 10,000 yuan per month. And when I saw this, I was like, well, is that good or bad? So I looked at the minimum wage for Guangzhou, and I saw that the minimum wage was actually 2,300 yuan Chinese currency. And I should also note that the monthly living wage in Guangzhou is 5,400 yuan. Minimum wage is like bare minimum. It's obviously like not the best. Living wage is like you have, you know, a comfortable living situation. On a good month, they get paid 10,000 yuan. And a bad month, they get paid 1/3 of that. So let's say 3,000 something. So at least compared to what I had thought, and on paper, they were getting paid decently. Some say even higher than industry standards. I was surprised by that. And one former supplier even said that Shein actually pays very well and on time. Shein paid them, the supplier, within 30 days. The industry standard is usually 45 days or more. I think that is really significant, and maybe something that we don't talk about, that Shein's doing well in terms of its operations and paying people on time. But the supplier said that they had to stop working with Shein just because they needed so much and the quick turnaround, so the supplier wasn't able to keep up with it. On paper, it sounds like, you know, they're getting paid more than the average person would think. This is just their wage, right? A lot of times they also have to support a family, and there's other people depending on them. So if we split that across the family with more people, that also raises a little bit of a question mark. On the flip side, I think it's very important to mention the work hours. Let's look more into what their working life is actually like. Channel 4's documentary, which I haven't seen because it's not available where I am, but if it is available to you, definitely go check it out. Let me know what you see from it. They saw some workers pulling 17-hour shifts. Chinese labor law is a maximum of 40 hours per week, and overtime can't exceed 36 hours. Workers should have at least 1 day off per week. The thing with this is like, oh, it violates Chinese law or whatever, but a lot of these garment workers don't even have formal labor contracts with the factories that they're working at. There's no official like employment contract. They don't have insurance for their work, so if something health related happens, like what, I don't even know what happened, right? It's just such a powerless situation to kind of be in. From just the general research I've done in the fast fashion industry and kind of the fashion industry in general, is this is actually very common. So Shein doing this, I don't think is much different than other companies. I think what just makes it more intense is just the amount of items that they have to turn around and then the demand that they're creating for it. So I do want to throw that out there. But again, you know, I am reminded again of the nature of these workers. Putting in those hours and creating so many pieces, it's kind of the goal at the same time. So I think it's honestly just a toxic relationship as a whole. Shein definitely perpetuates that system. I think that is maybe the bigger question that we should be asking, because personally I would love to actually talk with these workers to hear their experiences, because there's something that I will mention later. So I don't know when I will, so I'll just mention it now. To us, that sounds really terrible, just the long shifts and no breaks. But to them, this is their purpose. It is to make money from this job. It is to have that income and bring that income. It's not about taking breaks, it's about making money. And I would go as far to say that this is even the norm. If you see everyone else around you be in this situation, and you're surrounded by people who are also in this situation, I feel like you don't even question it. You just know that, you just feel like that's the way it should be, right? It only feels unnatural to us because we're privileged enough to realize that, to not be in that situation. I think there's also a huge like work culture issue, because I kind of see this translated with how we hustle in the US as well. Also the 996 culture in China, which I will talk about in a second too. My camera is overheating, so I don't know what to do. Which one should I talk about first? I'll talk about 996 culture first. 996 culture is big in China right now, and it usually applies to people in the corporate world, specifically in tech, and it's that they work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. 996. That is also a norm. And obviously their jobs are less manual, but to me that is also overworking. And so there is a bigger cultural norm of just working so much. I feel like in the US you see this as well, especially specifically for the very demanding industries. There was somebody who worked on Wall Street before that was a guest speaker at something that I was at, and he was talking about how he was always working. You know, the only time he like go back home is at like 3-4 a.m. to take a shower, and then he'll be back in the office. Like he'll sleep in the office. That's considered like a white collar professional job, and this is more like blue collar. Even then, there's still this similarity in just the demand of work and how much work you put in and how much time you put in, and really the lack of time to do anything else. I don't want that to be a comparison of like who's working harder or who needs to work harder. It's more of just noticing that pattern in our work culture and just the exploitation of people in general. So hopefully you can see it for that. But going back, this is addressing the claim that Shein workers are overworked, and it looks like that is very much the case. And that to us, as the outsiders looking in, is a huge problem. But to them, I wonder how they feel about it, or if they've accepted that as norm. My camera overheated again. But anyway, so we just talked about the work hours there, and they work over 75 hours per week. Now let's talk about the safety of these workers. There's so much to go into here. I like don't even know where to start. This is from people who were on the ground and they went into the factories, and they saw that at the factories there were no emergency exits. They also had blocked corridors just because they have these packages and they just place that in the hallways. I think that is honestly just the work culture problem. It's like when you have fire drills, like you just never expect something to happen, so like you don't really follow the procedures generally, but like you should. So their hallways are blocked, so in case there is a fire, like that is a genuine problem that, you know, they would have to face. The windows are also barred in the upper floors of the buildings for the workers. One, why are they barred? I think this reminds me of Foxconn. Like, they have nets over their windows in case somebody jumps off of the building. So is it like the fact that maybe people have tried jumping before? But if it's for the safety and there's a fire, like, the math is not gonna math there. In Shein's supplier code of conduct, they say that Shein requires its subcontractors to operate in full compliance with local laws, rules, governmental orders, and regulatory requirements. And I'm pretty sure, like, this is just one of those things that, like, companies, they say that they do. The first thing is to have a supplier code of conduct, but doesn't mean they're following it. It's just like people are so comfortable with their work environment that they're just like, you know, a barred window there, a blocked corridor there, like nothing bad's gonna happen, just carry on with business. But then if something bad does happen, that's like not safe for anyone. Okay, so they did like have their own audit, which I was pretty surprised by, because you have the perception that fast fashion companies are like not transparent at all. But they had audits of their own factories. And so of the nearly 700 suppliers, and by the way, I'm confused by this number because I saw that they have 300 to 400 main suppliers. So like, where did the extra 300 come from? Is it their main suppliers? Is it their subcontractors? So that's a question, but 83% of these 700 suppliers that were audited were operating with major risks. Like, what the heck? 83%, that's most of them. And major risk consists of fire and emergency preparedness. So that includes like the barred windows, the blocked corridors, and also the working hours. So just like long working hours, like we mentioned before in the video. And 12% of the suppliers had committed zero tolerance violations. So these are even more serious than the major risks. So this includes underage labor, child labor, basically, and forced labor. Like, what? I don't know what severe health and safety issues mean, but that is under the zero tolerance violation. You know, it has to be serious if it's zero tolerance, and there's a question of like whether they continue to work with those suppliers or not, or, you know, did they give them a warning? Like, what was kind of the next steps after finding out that? But child labor, forced labor, that is really serious. But, you know, unfortunately in the fashion world, there is a lot of kind of that involved. 12% out of 700, that's like 70 suppliers having that problem. I also had a question sent in on somebody that's doing a research project on this. This question comes from Brielle. She asked, do you think Shein actually uses child labor and forces its workers to create clothing for the company? If so, why? As you can see from their own report, even that 12% did have these zero tolerance violations. Of the 12% here, I don't know how much of it is underage labor, child labor, forced labor, but even Shein themselves have said that they have found child labor and forced labor in their supply chain. So I'm really trying to be here with the facts and upfront, and if this is from Shein themselves, then, you know, we can't even argue with that. Like, they would have the least amount of interest to be exposing this information, but the fact that they are is, one, I think surprising, so I respect them for that. But you know, it is a problem that they have. As for like the rest, I don't think it's forced labor. I just think it is a tragic situation to be in. I think it's a system problem. You know, I always get the question like, don't you think that they could just work somewhere else? And obviously, like, the garment workers, they can work somewhere else, but it's not like they have the time and really so much as the autonomy to be just like picking their jobs. I think even that is a privilege. You know, you kind of just comes with it. You just go with the opportunity that is in front of you. And for these people, I'm guessing it is, you know, working at Shein and producing their clothes. So I think it's very complicated. I don't think it's forced like slavery, like you have to be here, but it's like forced in the sense where in the bigger picture of society, like the lack of access to more opportunities or better opportunities, because it's just focused on making the most amount of clothes in the fastest amount of time possible for the cheapest price possible. And when you have all that combined, I just don't think there's a lot of options. Obviously, I wish there was. Where is the time to even think about these other jobs if they are washing their hair over their lunch break? Think about, like, when was the last time you like evaluated your life? How many of us actually sit down and be like, oh, like, I'm gonna do this without being influenced by the system? Because like everyone's trying to tell you to do something, like you need to go to school, you need to go to college, like you need to go to work, you need to get a job. But like, what do you actually want to do? And I feel like that is the bigger problem for all of us, not just the workers at Shein, but just like genuinely this like pursuit of personal autonomy. And even if we do have the privilege to think about these things and have the time, I feel like a lot of people just don't. Like, we just go on social media as a distraction, you know? So okay, so this is the shock factor that I actually found. This goes back to kind of people feeling that this is the norm and this is how things are. The Shein workers that they interviewed, these garment workers, they were more or less satisfied with their job. Just by the way that we talk about Shein garment workers, like I think we kind of project ourselves onto them, like they're suffering, like living their worst lives, you know, it's just a bad situation to be in. But that's not their concern. Their concern is not about, like, I don't know, the quality or the fulfillment of the job. They're more or less satisfied. They're more concerned about the ongoing reduction to the piece rates, so how much they're getting paid per piece. That's what they're thinking about. It's still the money at the end of the day, like how much am I getting paid? And the person that actually interviewed them said, I don't believe they think about it that much. So it's like not even on their mind. And this goes back to like having the time to even think about this kind of stuff. They don't even think about if this job is like ethical, is humane, like is it proper treatment, is it fair treatment towards me? It's like, but how much am I getting paid? If you genuinely look at it with less bias, hopefully you take away something from this. Okay, so you guys are literally fake, because I looked back at the footage and the angle was so wrong. Like, y'all did me so dirty by not telling me that. So I gotta finish strong with this setup right here. Hopefully it looks better, but anyways, so we're gonna just look at like what Shein has actually said or done about these violations. They say that all suppliers would be required to comply with a code of conduct based on conventions by the International Labor Organization. I think what's really actually hard about that is monitoring that, making sure that it is being followed. This usually happens with random audits from like what I just know about the industry. They say that they will have independent agencies to conduct regular audits of supplier factories. But also, like we mentioned before, there is concern that the price they're getting paid per piece is going down. So it's a little bit like iffy on what the actual truth is. And of course, it varies from supplier to supplier too. So it's kind of like there's so much gray area. It's not just black and white like that. But in the end, and I believe this was towards the end of last year, Shein announced that they're going to spend $15 million to like improve their working conditions. And for this source, they said this money would also go to increasing the frequency of unannounced spot checks. So this goes back to like kind of what we were saying before. This is kind of what we want. This is the right direction. They also said provide better training for the factories to comply with the laws. I think this goes back to the very beginning when we were talking about how there's just so many different parties involved. There's Shein, there's a main supplier, there's the subcontractors, and it is really a whole logistics movement to have everyone be on the same board, aligned. I mean, you can see that even with the way that they pay, each manufacturer kind of operates on its own, and of course you can hope that like they comply with laws, but if the work is getting subcontracted, it's not something that Shein can necessarily manage and have that much power over, I guess, except for like not working with them. I think that would be like the only case. I feel like there's a lot of different moving parts, so it's really up to them to make sure that everything is functioning correctly in this. And of course, I think Shein also has the power to pay their workers more. Would they take a lower margin for that, or would they put that cost onto the consumer? There's just like so many different questions to address here, but at least for the outlook, it looks like, you know, you never really know how much of what they're saying actually matches their actions. But this is what we just kind of have to stay tuned for. This really goes beyond Shein. It likely transfers to other mass market brands that we're pretty much all familiar with. It also even goes with working professionals and how much people kind of have to work in general, support themselves, their family, along with the rising cost of living. I think there's like a much deeper problem here and a much deeper culture that often gets overlooked when we're just talking about Shein, which is why I wanted to make this video, because I could make a short or a TikTok, but there's so much complexity in this topic, y'all. It's like, yeah, there's so much to dive into. And at the end of the day, like, of course, this is all secondary research. I would love to just hear it from the workers themselves. Even though the people, like the research here, they interviewed the employees, you know, it's still getting translated back again, and maybe from a perspective that has an agenda. In the meantime, that's it for this video. I hope you learned a ton here. So I think it was very insightful and interesting, and there were things that definitely surprised me. And don't forget that there will be a part 3 on Shein's effects on the environment, so if you're interested in seeing that, definitely subscribe and stay tuned. Okay, well, got to go. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.